These are the stages by which the Israelites went out of the land of Egypt in military formation under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. Moses wrote down their starting points stage by stages by command of the Lord, and these are their stages according to their starting places. They set out from Ramses in the first month, on the 15th day of the first month. On the day after the Passover, the Israelites went out boldly in the sight of all the Egyptians, while the Egyptians were bearing all their firstborn whom the Lord had struck down among them. The Lord executed judgments even against their gods. So the Israelites set out from Ramses and camped at Succoth. They set out from Succoth and camped at Etham, which is on the edge of the wilderness. They set out from Etham and turned back to Pi-Hahiroth, which faces Baal-Zephon, and they camped before Migdol. They set out from Pi-Hahiroth, passed through the sea into the wilderness, went a 3 days' journey in the wilderness of Etham, and camped at Madah. They set out from Madah and came to Elim. At Elim there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there. They set out from Elim and camped by the Red Sea. They set out from the Red Sea and camped in the wilderness of Sin. They set out from the wilderness of Sin and camped at Dopka. They set out from Dopka and camped at Elush. They set out from Alush and camped at Rephidim, where there was no water for the people to drink. They set out from Rephidim and camped in the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from the wilderness of Sinai and camped at Kibroth Hattava. They set out from Kibroth Hattava and camped at Hazeroth. They set out from Hazeroth and camped at Rithmah. They set out from Rithmah and camped at Rimmon Perez. They set out from Rimmon Perez and camped at Libnah. They set out from Libnah and camped at Rissa. They set out from Rissa and camped at Keheletha. They set out from Keheletha and camped at Mount Shephar. They set out from Mount Shephar and camped at Heradah. They set out from Heradah and camped at Mekheloth. And they set out from Mekheloth and camped at Tahath. They set out from Tahath and camped at Teda. They camped at Teda and camped at Mithka. They set out from Mithka and camped at Hashmona. They set out from Hashmona and camped at Masaroth. They set out from Masaroth and camped at Ben-Najakan. They set out from Ben-Najakan and camped at Hor Haggidgad. And they set out from Hor Haggidgad and camped at Jotpatha. They set out from Jotpatha and camped at Abrona. They set out from Abrona and camped at Ezion-Geber. And they set out from Ezion-Geber and camped in the wilderness of Zin, that is Kadesh. They set out from Kadesh and camped at Mount Hor on the edge of the land of Edom. Aaron the priest went up Mount Hor at the command of the Lord and died there in the 40th year after the Israelites had come out of the land of Egypt on the first day of the 5th month. Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor. The Canaanite, the king of Edad, who lived in Negeb in the land of Canaan, heard of the coming of the Israelites. They set out from Mount Hor and camped at Zalmanah. They set out from Zalmanah and camped at Punon. They set out from Punon and camped at Oboth. They set out from Oboth and camped at Iriabrim in the territory of Moab. They set out from Iyim and camped at Dibon-Gad. They set out from Dibon-Gad and camped at Almon-Deblathim. They set out from Almon-Deblathim and camped in the mountains of Abadim before Nebo. They set out from the mountains of Abadim and camped in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. They camped by the Jordan from Beth-Shemesh as far as Eber-Shittim in the plains of Moab. In the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, destroy all their figured stones, destroy all their cast images, and demolish all their high places. You shall take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to possess. You shall apportion the land by a lot according to your clans. To a large one you shall give a large inheritance, and a small one you shall give small inheritance. The inheritance shall belong to the person on whom whom the lot falls, according to your ancestral tribes, you shall inherit. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those whom you let remain shall be as barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They shall trouble you in the land where you are settling, and I will do to you as I thought to do to them.